A lonely millionaire visits his brother's grave and finds a little girl crying alone. She looks at him with eyes identical to the deceased's and asks, "Did you know my father?" The millionaire is shocked by what he discovers. The rain poured mercilessly over Westfield Cemetery in Boston as Michael Harrison, CEO of Harrison Enterprises, stood motionless before his brother's headstone. 3 years had passed since Andrew's accident, but the void remained unfilled. Lightning illuminated the grey Massachusetts sky as Michael placed white lilies on the marble marker. His Armani suit soaked through, despite the umbrella his driver held nearby. "Did you know my daddy?" The small voice startled him. Michael turned to find a little girl, no older than 5, sheltering under a pink umbrella decorated with butterflies. Her bright blue eyes pierced through him with an unsettling familiarity. "I'm sorry," Michael's voice cracked. "My mommy says I should visit my daddy. She says he's here." The child pointed at Andrew's headstone. Michael felt the ground shift beneath him. Those eyes. Andrew's eyes. Before he could respond, a woman rushed toward them, her expression changing from concern to shock when she recognized Michael. "Emily, come here," she called, her voice tight. Then to Michael, "I didn't expect to see you here today." "Sarah?" Michael recognized his brother's former girlfriend from years ago. "I don't understand." Sarah pulled Emily closer. "This is Emily, Andrew's daughter." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. His brother had a child. How could he not know? "That's impossible. Andrew would have told me." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "He tried. For months after we broke up. All those calls you ignored, the messages your assistant blocked, he was trying to tell you I was pregnant." Memories flooded back. Andrew desperate to talk about his relationship with Sarah, Michael dismissing it as a distraction from the company's expansion. The repeated calls Michael had instructed his assistant to screen after their argument about Andrew's future at Harrison Enterprises. "I need to sit down," Michael whispered. They moved to a bench under a sheltering oak tree. Emily splashed in puddles nearby as Sarah explained how Andrew had discovered the pregnancy after their breakup, how he had been overjoyed despite their relationship ending, how he had tried repeatedly to reach out to Michael. "The last time I saw him, he had just bought tickets to a Red Sox game. He was planning to show up at your office that Friday to tell you about Emily and ask you to be her godfather." Sarah's voice broke. "The accident happened the next morning." Michael stared at Emily, seeing his brother in every feature. The resemblance was uncanny. The same curious tilt of the head, the same intense blue eyes that had once looked up to Michael with admiration, before business and ambition had driven a wedge between them. "Would you like to meet her properly?" Sarah asked cautiously. "Yes," Michael answered without hesitation. "Please." They agreed to meet for coffee the following day. As Michael returned to his chauffeur-driven Tesla, his phone buzzed with notifications from the office. Urgent matters, critical decisions, international calls scheduled throughout the evening. For the first time in years, he silenced it. Back in his immaculate Beacon Hill penthouse, Michael poured himself a scotch and looked around at the minimalist space that interior designers had created, but he had never truly lived in. 16-hour workdays had built Harrison Enterprises into a financial powerhouse, but his personal life was as empty as the pristine rooms surrounding him. The next day at a small cafe in Cambridge, Sarah arrived with a leather-bound journal. Andrew kept this for Emily. He wrote in it nearly every day after finding out about the pregnancy. Stories from his childhood, recipes, plans for her future, things he wanted her to know. Michael's hands trembled as he accepted it. "I don't deserve this." "You're right," Sarah agreed. "But Emily deserves to know her father's family, even you." She explained her conditions. No expensive gifts, no superficial presents. If Michael wanted a place in Emily's life, it would require consistency, family dinners, school events, weekend outings, real commitment. That evening, invited to dinner at Sarah's parents' home in Somerville, Michael faced David, Emily's maternal grandfather, whose hostility was palpable. "So now you want to buy your way into her life?" David challenged over pot roast. "Dad," Sarah warned. "No, he's right," Michael admitted. "I became a money-making machine. 16-hour days, international deals, acquiring companies. I lost sight of what matters. But seeing her eyes, Andrew's eyes, I realize I have a second chance to be the person my brother always believed I could be." Later, reading Emily a bedtime story, Michael was struck by a line about seeing with the heart. After Emily fell asleep, he opened Andrew's journal and collapsed into tears, discovering his brother had never hated him. Andrew had admired him, disagreed with his choices, but always hoped they would reconcile. The last entry, written the night before the accident, mentioned the baseball tickets and his excitement about introducing Michael to the idea of being an uncle and godfather. The next morning, Michael Harrison made the most significant change to his calendar in 15 years. He delegated the most important international negotiation of the semester to his VP, cancelled recurring evening meetings, and blocked off time for family commitments. "Are you feeling all right?" asked Jeffrey Wilson, his CFO and oldest friend, leaning against the doorframe of Michael's corner office. "First you show up on time instead of at dawn, now you're delegating the Singapore merger." "I'm making changes," Michael said simply, looking out at the Boston skyline. "I've missed too much already." "This about that little girl, your brother's kid?" Michael nodded. "Emily, she's 5, she has his eyes, Jeff." That afternoon, Michael left the office at 3 p.m., unprecedented in company history, to pick Emily up from kindergarten. Teachers and parents stared as the notorious workaholic CEO introduced himself as Emily's uncle and awkwardly navigated the elementary school hallways in his tailored suit. Emily presented him with a crayon drawing labeled "Me and My Uncle Michael," featuring 2 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. Something shifted inside him as he carefully placed it in his briefcase. At a nearby cafe, Michael helped with homework, discovering that kindergarten math had changed considerably since his childhood. Emily laughed at his confusion, and the sound, so reminiscent of Andrew's laugh, made his chest tighten. "Your house has no colors," Emily declared, when he brought her to his penthouse later that week. Standing in his monochromatic living room with its carefully curated furniture and emptiness, Michael saw his home through her eyes for the first time. The barrenness of his personal life was on full display. That evening, he hung Emily's drawing on his refrigerator, the first personal item displayed in his home in years. It looked out of place against the sleek stainless steel, yet somehow made the entire kitchen feel warmer. Dinners at Sarah's family home became a regular event. Between helpings of homemade macaroni and chocolate pudding, Michael built bridges with Emily's grandmother Marie, while weathering David's continued suspicion. "I'm not trying to buy anyone's affection," Michael told David one evening while helping with dishes. "I just want to be present in her life." David's response was gruff but softening. "Actions, not words, Harrison. We'll see." Michael established new rituals. Tuesday nights became homemade pizza night, a tradition Andrew had started when dating Sarah. Michael learned to make dough from scratch, failed spectacularly at first, then gradually improved. Even David eventually contributed, sharing his secret sauce recipe with just a touch of honey. Sarah shared stories of Andrew that Michael had never known: his irrational fear of clowns, his habit of singing in the shower, how he'd spent weeks planning the perfect proposal before their relationship ended. Sundays became family lunch days. Michael watched football with David when the older man's diabetes allowed him to stay awake, and gradually the iciness between them thawed. When Michael discreetly researched treatment options and presented David with information about a subsidized clinical trial at Massachusetts General Hospital, framed not as charity, but as family care, the final walls began to crumble. At Harrison Enterprises, the transformation was public. Michael now arrived and left during normal business hours, delegated day-to-day operations, and blocked afternoons for commitments with Emily. When he declined a multi-million-dollar international trip to attend Emily's ballet recital, the entire executive floor buzzed with speculation. "What happens when the first emotional crisis hits?" Jeffrey asked during their weekly racquetball game. "When the honeymoon phase ends and reality sets in, you've built your identity around this company." "I don't know," Michael admitted, lowering his racket. "But I know I can't fail her again. I can't fail Andrew again." At the recital, watching 5-year-olds in tutus twirl clumsily across the stage, Michael experienced something foreign yet familiar: the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. When Emily spotted him in the audience, her face lit up with a joy that no business deal had ever provided. The changes extended to his home. Emily's visits transformed the sterile penthouse. Colorful magnetic letters appeared on his refrigerator. A shelf in his minimalist living room now held children's books. A dinosaur nightlight, stood guard in the guest bedroom that was becoming Emily's room. His assistant, Claire, who had worked with him for 12 years, remarked that he was smiling in meetings now. Executives who had feared his legendary temper found him more patient, more willing to listen. The company's culture, long defined by Michael's relentless drive, began shifting towards something more sustainable. One evening, while helping Emily with a school project about family trees, Michael found himself telling stories about Andrew as a child, how they had built forts in the backyard, how Andrew had always defended smaller kids at school, how he could charm anyone with his smile. "Mommy says I have Daddy's smile," Emily said, carefully gluing a photo of Andrew onto her project. "You absolutely do," Michael agreed, his voice thick with emotion, and his eyes, and his kind heart. That night, after returning to his penthouse, Michael opened Andrew's journal again. Among the entries, he discovered something he'd missed before, a sealed envelope addressed to him, dated 3 weeks before the accident. Michael stared at the envelope with his name written in Andrew's familiar handwriting. For several minutes, he couldn't bring himself to open it. When he finally did, his brother's words poured out from beyond. "Mike, if you're reading this, something's happened to me or we've finally talked things out. Either way, I need you to know something. I never hated you. I disagreed with your choices, but I always admired your determination. Now I have something incredible to tell you. I'm going to be a father. Her name will be Emily if she's a girl, after Mom. I hope you'll be in her life no matter what happens between us. Remember who you really are. Not the company man, but the brother who taught me to throw a baseball and stood up for me when Dad was too harsh. If I'm not around, be better for both of us. Not the best businessman, the best person. You know who that is. Emily will discover it too." Michael read the letter 3 times before placing it carefully back in the envelope. That night, he slept soundly for the first time in years. The next 2 months established a rhythm. Michael rearranged board meetings around school pickups. He learned the names of Emily's teachers and friends. He discovered that dinosaurs were her current obsession and found himself researching paleontology at midnight to answer her endless questions. Then came the failure. International pressure mounted at Harrison Enterprises. A major investor threatened to withdraw capital, claiming leadership instability after Michael declined 3 consecutive overseas trips. The merger he had delegated faced resistance. Board members demanded his presence at an emergency session, scheduled the same afternoon as Emily's school play, where she would perform as a triceratops. "It's just this once," Michael assured himself as he texted Sarah that he couldn't make it. "The company needs me. Thousands of jobs are at stake." He sat through the 6-hour meeting in a fog, barely registering the financial projections and risk assessments. His phone remained in his pocket, silenced but weighing heavily. When he finally checked it that evening, he found a single message from Sarah. "She saved a seat for you." She kept looking at the door. Attached was a photo of Emily in her dinosaur costume, her face painted green and brown, with unmistakable disappointment in her eyes, Andrew's eyes. Michael drove to Sarah's house immediately, but the lights were off. When he returned home, he found Emily's backpack in his car with her costume inside, and a note in childish handwriting. "Today, you were going to see me be a dinosaur." The next morning, Sarah answered his call with a clipped tone. "I'm so sorry," Michael began. "This isn't about one missed play," Sarah interrupted. "It's about patterns. You're doing exactly what you did with Andrew, making promises, then choosing the company when it matters. That's not fair. I've changed everything about my life." "For 2 months, Michael. 2 months isn't a life commitment. Love isn't a part-time project. Either fully commit or step back before she gets too attached." The line went dead. For days, Michael tried to re-establish contact. His texts went unanswered. When he drove by the house, David came out to the porch, arms crossed. "I told Sarah this would happen," the older man said. "Conscience buying doesn't last. When the novelty wears off, you people always return to type." Michael sat alone on a park bench, Andrew's journal clutched in his hands. The company demanded his attention. Crisis meetings were scheduled hourly. His phone buzzed constantly with urgent matters that suddenly seemed trivial compared to the loss of Emily's smile. On the 5th day of silence, he made his decision. Michael called an emergency board meeting, but not to discuss markets or mergers. He announced his temporary step back from day-to-day operations effective immediately. He appointed Jeffrey as interim CEO and reduced his own role to strategic oversight, requiring no more than 20 hours weekly. "Have you lost your mind?" demanded Walter Simmons, their largest individual investor. "The Singapore deal alone requires your personal attention. The Lee family won't negotiate with anyone else." "Then they'll wait," Michael replied calmly, "or they'll walk. Either way, my decision is made." The boardroom erupted. Threats of funding cuts, veiled suggestions of voting him out, emotional appeals about his father's legacy, none penetrated. Michael had spent 15 years afraid of losing the company. Now, he feared losing something far more precious. That afternoon, he wrote a letter to Sarah and Emily, apologizing not just for the play but for the pattern it represented. He acknowledged his failure with Andrew and his determination not to repeat it. Then, rather than sending it, he drove to Sarah's parents' house and waited on the porch swing. When Sarah arrived from work, Emily asleep in the back seat, she approached him warily. "You're stubborn, I'll give you that." "It's a Harrison family trait," Michael replied. "Andrew had it too." Sarah studied him. "The school called. They said you withdrew Emily from the after-school program and arranged to pick her up yourself 3 days a week. They needed my approval. I should have discussed it with you first, I'm sorry. You also called David's endocrinologist, and you contacted the Diabetes Research Center." Michael nodded. "The clinical trial could help him. It's not charity, Sarah. It's family." For the first time in days, Sarah's expression softened. "You're really doing this, aren't you? Reorganizing your entire life." "I am. I had to decide what kind of legacy matters more, the company or the people in my life. Andrew already knew the answer. It just took me longer to figure it out." Sarah glanced at Emily, still sleeping in the car. "She's been asking about you, wondering if you don't like dinosaurs anymore." Michael smiled sadly. "I've been studying up. Did you know Triceratops could reach 30 feet in length, and that despite their size, they were herbivores?" Something between a laugh and a sigh escaped Sarah. "She has a science museum field trip next Saturday. They have a dinosaur exhibit. You could come if you're serious about this." The Boston Museum of Science buzzed with excited children and harried parents that Saturday morning. Michael arrived an hour early, having researched not just dinosaurs but the entire museum layout, wheelchair accessibility for David, and even the cafeteria menu to ensure options for everyone's dietary needs. When Sarah's car pulled up, Emily bolted toward him wearing a t-shirt with a velociraptor on it. The hesitation in her eyes lasted only a moment before she launched herself into his arms. "Uncle Michael, did you know they have a real T-Rex skeleton?" "I did," he replied, lifting her up. "And a Triceratops, too. I thought maybe you could tell me all about them." David approached slowly, leaning on a cane, Marie supporting his other arm. His expression remained guarded, but he gave Michael a curt nod of acknowledgement. "Nice museum," he commented gruffly. "It's been years since I've been here." Michael had arranged special passes that allowed them to skip lines and access quiet rest areas throughout the museum. As Emily darted from exhibit to exhibit, Michael matched her enthusiasm, asking questions that showcased his recent paleontology studies. Sarah watched them with cautious optimism. During a quiet moment while Emily explored a hands-on fossil exhibit with Marie, David settled onto a bench beside Michael. "Sarah tells me you're restructuring your company." His tone was neutral, neither approving nor condemning. "I am. The board isn't happy, but they'll adjust or I'll step down completely." David's eyebrows rose. "That's quite a change from the man who missed holidays because of urgent conference calls." "I've missed enough," Michael said simply. "I don't intend to miss any more." David studied him for a long moment. "You know, Andrew always had a feeling." "About what?" "That you'd come around eventually. Even after your big fight about the company direction," he told Sarah. "Mike will remember who he is someday." Seems he might have been right. They watched Emily enthusiastically explaining dinosaur facts to her grandmother. "She gets that teaching instinct from her father," David continued. Andrew could talk for hours about things that fascinated him. For the first time, Michael heard genuine warmth in David's voice when speaking about Andrew. Not grief or bitterness, but appreciation for who his son had been. "I'd like to propose something," Michael said carefully. Andrew had a tradition of reading to Emily in the park by the pond on Sunday mornings. Sarah mentioned it once. "I'd like to continue that." David considered this. He loved that spot, Used to take his college textbooks there even before Emily came along. I don't want to replace him, Michael clarified. I just want to honor what he started. David nodded slowly. That might be all right. The following morning, Michael arrived at the park with a canvas bag full of children's books, including some that had belonged to Andrew as a child, rescued from their parents' attic. He and Emily settled on the bench overlooking the duck pond, and he began reading The Little Prince from start to finish. Halfway through, Emily leaned against his side and eventually fell asleep against his shoulder. Just as she had that first night he'd read to her, the weight of her trust felt both terrifying and miraculous. Weeks passed, and the new arrangements solidified. Michael's home gained more color, framed photos, art supplies, and a growing collection of dinosaur figurines. His office acquired family pictures and a plush triceratops that Emily had given him to guard your desk when you're at meetings. His bookshelves, once exclusively filled with economics and management texts, now hosted astronomy guides, children's literature, and paleontology references. The transformation wasn't just cosmetic, it was fundamental. Sarah's home became an extension of his world. Tuesday pizza nights became sacred, with Michael perfecting his technique under David's increasingly friendly guidance. Sunday park readings expanded to include picnics. Emily included Michael in her family tree drawing for school, labeling him "My Uncle Mike, who has the same eyes as my daddy." At work, the transition progressed better than expected. Jeffrey thrived with additional responsibility, and clients adjusted to the new arrangement. The Lee family, after initial resistance, agreed to resume negotiations on the Singapore merger, impressed by what they called Michael's family-first principles, values they held in high regard themselves. The most significant change was internal. The question driving Michael was no longer how to maximize contracts, but how to be present for nighttime fevers, school assignments, ballet recitals, and pizza Tuesdays. Not everything was smooth. Board members still questioned his commitment. Competitors whispered about weakness in leadership. A distant aunt contested part of Andrew's estate, forcing Michael to navigate delicate legal waters. Rather than fighting, he offered a friendly settlement, redirecting the resources to Emily's education fund and reinforcing that he wanted to preserve relationships, not assets. The gesture changed the narrative within the extended family. One evening, as Michael helped Emily with homework at his penthouse, she looked up at him with Andrew's earnest blue eyes. "Uncle Michael, are you sad sometimes?" The question caught him off guard. "Sometimes." "Why do you ask?" "Because Daddy's not here. And Mummy says it's okay to be sad about that." Michael set down his pen. "I am sad about that. I miss your dad very much." Emily nodded solemnly. "Me too, even though I didn't know him. But Mommy says I know him through his stories and now through you too." "What do you mean?" "Because you knew him, and you have his eyes, like I do, and you read his favorite books to me. So it's kind of like having a piece of him here." Michael felt his throat tighten. "That's very wise for someone who's only 5. Emily rolled her eyes dramatically. "I'm 5.5. Later that night, after Sarah picked Emily up, Michael sat alone in his transformed living room. He opened Andrew's journal to a page he'd read dozens of times, where his brother had written about hopes for his unborn child. For the first time, the words didn't bring pain, they brought purpose. 6 months after that rainy day in Westfield Cemetery, Michael sat in the back row of Emily's kindergarten classroom during their end-of-year celebration. The walls were covered with artwork, including Emily's family portrait that now featured her mother, grandparents, and Uncle Michael with Daddy's eyes. When the teacher asked the children to share what made their families special, Emily stepped forward confidently. "My family has my mom who makes the best pancakes, and my grandma who knows how to fix anything, and my grandpa who tells funny jokes, and my Uncle Michael who knows everything about dinosaurs and reads stories with different voices." She paused, then added, "And my daddy watches over us from heaven and sends us blue butterflies to say hello." Michael caught Sarah's eye across the room. They shared a smile that acknowledged both the pain and healing of the past months. After the presentation, Emily's teacher approached Michael. "Emily talks about you all the time, Mr. Harrison. My uncle runs a big company, but he still has time to help me with homework. You've made quite an impression." "She's the one who's made an impression on me," Michael replied honestly. The transition at Harrison Enterprises had stabilized. Jeffrey had proven himself capable as interim CEO, and the board had reluctantly accepted Michael's part-time executive chairman role. The Singapore merger had completed successfully, though Michael had participated primarily via video conference, rather than spending weeks in Asia as he would have in the past. His most vocal critic on the board, Walter Simmons, had recently conceded, "I thought you were having a midlife crisis, but your work quality hasn't suffered. If anything, you're making more strategic decisions now that you're not micromanaging everything." That evening, Sarah invited Michael for a private dinner after Emily went to bed, something that had never happened before. "I wanted to thank you," she said, pouring wine in her small dining room. "Not just for being there for Emily, but for how you've handled everything with Andrew's family, with David's medical treatment, with the estate issues." "I should be thanking you," Michael countered. "You could have kept Emily from me completely and you would have been justified." Sarah shook her head. "Family isn't about keeping score. It's about moving forward." She hesitated. "There's something I've been wanting to give you." She disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a small box. Inside was a baseball, worn and slightly discolored. "Andrew kept this. It was from the first game you took him to at Fenway Park when he was 8. He told me it was the happiest day of his childhood." Michael turned the ball in his hands, memory washing over him. "Dad was supposed to take us both, but he had a last-minute business trip. I saved my allowance for weeks to buy the tickets." "That's who you really are, Michael. That's who Emily is getting to know now." In the months that followed, Michael's transformation became complete. His penthouse, once a showcase of minimalist design, now held evidence of a life fully lived. Emily's artwork on the refrigerator, family photos on the walls, a guest room permanently converted into Emily's room, with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. The Harrison family expanded their traditions. In addition to Sunday readings and Tuesday pizza nights, they added monthly science museum visits and summer picnics at the Boston Commons. When David's health improved enough through the clinical trial, they even attended a Red Sox game together, sitting in the same section where Michael and Andrew had sat as children. Emily started first grade that fall. On the first day of school, all 4 adults, Sarah, Michael, Marie, and David, came to drop her off. As they walked back to their cars together, David pulled Michael aside. "You know, I've been thinking about Andrew's old workshop in our garage. It's just collecting dust now. But I remember he mentioned wanting to build a treehouse someday for his kids. Thought maybe you and I could take on that project. For Emily." The offer to build something together for Andrew's child was more meaningful than any business deal Michael had ever closed. That weekend, Michael arrived at the Caldwell home with blueprints and building materials. He and David spent the day measuring, cutting, and planning, while Emily provided supervision and design ideas involving princess flags and dinosaur lookout posts. As the men worked side by side, David suddenly said, "He would be pleased, you know." "Who?" "Andrew. Seeing all this. Seeing you with her." The older man concentrated on measuring a plank of wood. Life gives us second chances sometimes. Not everyone takes them. That night, after returning to his penthouse, Michael opened his laptop and finalized a document he'd been working on for weeks, his official resignation as CEO of Harrison Enterprises, effective after a 6-month transition period. He would remain on the board but step back from operations completely. The company had been his life's work, but it was no longer his life's purpose. The following Sunday in the park, as Emily fed ducks and chased butterflies, Sarah sat beside Michael on their regular bench. Emily's teacher called yesterday. Apparently Emily told the class that her family might look different from others, but it's perfect exactly how it is. Michael watched Emily carefully counting out bread pieces to ensure each duck received a fair share. Andrew's sense of justice clearly visible in her actions. "She's right," he said. "It is perfect." Later, as they finished reading The Little Prince, Emily pointed to the famous line about seeing rightly with the heart. "That's what Daddy wrote in his journal, too. He said hearts can see things eyes can't." Michael nodded, thinking of the journey that had brought him here, from a rain-soaked cemetery to this sun-dappled park bench, from a life built around acquisition to one built around connection. Andrew had always seen what Michael couldn't, that empires matter less than moments, that legacies aren't measured in market shares but in memories created. The promise that once fit on a baseball ticket and an ultrasound now expanded to fill an entire life. that of a man who learned, late but not too late, that building relationships matters more than building fortunes. In Emily's drawings, in the treehouse rising in David's backyard, in the Sunday ritual of ducks and stories, Andrew's legacy continued, not through corporate holdings or investment portfolios, but through the blue eyes of his daughter and the transformed heart of his brother.